I still remember the day I made the decision to send my son, Ethan, to live with my sister. It wasn't a choice I made lightly, but it was a choice that felt necessary given the circumstances at the time. Ethan was 8 years old, and we had just welcomed our second child, Lily. From the outside, our family might have looked like it was finally settling into a routine, but internally, I was struggling. Raising 2 children, balancing the demands of a growing family, and trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy had started to take a toll on me, emotionally, physically, and mentally. Ethan had always been a sensitive child, but over the past year, he had become increasingly difficult to manage. His behavior was erratic, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to reach him. His school grades were slipping, and he was constantly in trouble for misbehaving. I remember long, sleepless nights where I would try to reason with him, to talk him through his frustrations, but nothing seemed to work. I couldn't help but feel like I was failing as a mother. It's not that I didn't love him. I loved him more than anything, but there were days when the constant battles with him drained me, and the frustration built up until I could hardly keep it together. I felt like I was giving all of my energy to Lily, who was a newborn and needed me so much, and Ethan, who seemed to need even more. The emotional exhaustion was overwhelming. One evening, after another argument about schoolwork, I sat down with my husband, Mark, to talk things through. We had been discussing Ethan's behavior for months, trying to figure out what we could do differently. Mark suggested that perhaps Ethan just needed a change of environment, something different to help him reset. At first, I resisted the idea. The thought of sending my son away felt like a betrayal, but as we talked more, the idea started to make sense. We both knew that Ethan was struggling, and maybe, just maybe, being away from us for a while would give him the space he needed to grow. I had never imagined I would be in this position, where I would be sending my son away to live with someone else, but it was clear that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to help him the way he needed. My sister, Claire, was the only one I trusted to take care of him. She had no children of her own, and her home was peaceful, calm, and stable. Everything Ethan needed. I spoke to her about the possibility, and to my relief, she agreed. I felt a knot form in my stomach the moment I made the phone call to Claire. I wasn't sure how to tell Ethan what was happening. He had always been close to me, and the idea of separating from him even temporarily felt like I was breaking something inside him, but I couldn't ignore the sense of urgency I felt. I needed to make sure he had a chance to thrive, and I wasn't certain he would do that while still living with us, under the constant pressure of our chaotic household. I'll never forget the look on Ethan's face when I told him. I explained that he would be going to live with Aunt Claire for a while so that he could have a fresh start. He didn't understand at first, and when the realization finally hit him, he cried. The tears broke my heart, but I couldn't back down. I knew, deep down, it was the right thing for him. I tried to comfort him, told him that he was still my son, and that this wasn't a punishment. It was an opportunity for him to grow and find himself. Mark and I packed his things together. I could see the sadness in Mark's eyes, but he too believed this was what was best. We drove Ethan to Claire's house, and I tried to make the goodbye as easy as possible, though my heart was heavy. I kissed him on the forehead, told him I loved him, and promised we would see each other soon. Then I left, trying to convince myself that I was doing the right thing, that I wasn't abandoning him, but just giving him the space he needed to figure things out. The drive home was the quietest we'd had in months. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed him in some way. I had tried so hard to be a good mother, but it felt like nothing I did was ever enough. I wanted to believe this would be good for him, that he would have the time and space to reset, but deep down, I couldn't help but wonder if I was making a mistake. In the weeks that followed, life at home felt different. Lily, being so young, needed constant attention, but there was an emptiness without Ethan. I missed his presence, even if it had been difficult at times. I tried not to let guilt consume me, but it was hard not to feel responsible for everything that had gone wrong. I would call Claire every few days to check on Ethan, but it was hard to gauge how he was really doing. The guilt of sending him away lingered, and I couldn't stop thinking about how he was adjusting to life without me. During those first few months, I started to notice something. Ethan's behavior started to improve. Claire had a calmness about her that I didn't have, and Ethan seemed to thrive in that environment. He was doing well in school, making friends, and becoming the child I had always hoped he could be. The pressure that had been weighing on him and on me, had lifted. I was happy to hear that he was doing better, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was slipping further and further away from me. I began to realize that perhaps sending Ethan away wasn't just about helping him, it was about me needing a break too. I needed to step away from the constant stress of motherhood, and in doing so, I may have distanced myself from my own son. The guilt that came with that was almost unbearable at times. Could I have handled things differently? Could I have found a way to balance it all without sending him away? The questions haunted me, but the answers remained elusive. Mark and I talked often about Ethan, and as much as we tried to justify our decision, it became increasingly clear that we couldn't just pretend everything was fine. Ethan had been the one to bear the brunt of our mistakes. We had tried, but in the end, it was clear that we weren't the parents he needed. In the end, I realized that sending him away was only a temporary solution to a much deeper problem. While it had helped Ethan, I couldn't escape the feeling that I had failed him as a mother, and that no matter how hard I tried, I could never truly fix the damage that had been done. Since Ethan went to live with my sister, I had a strange feeling of both relief and guilt. On one hand, the constant tension and the pressure of trying to manage a difficult child had been lifted. Mark and I could finally focus more on Lily, our newborn, and the family we were starting to build. The house felt quieter, and in some ways, it felt easier to breathe. But on the other hand, there was an underlying sense of emptiness that never quite went away. Ethan was gone, and though I told myself it was the right decision, the guilt gnawed at me every day. At first, I tried to bury the feelings of regret. I told myself that this was what was best for him, that the change of scenery, the fresh start with Claire, was what he needed. I had convinced myself that being away from me, even temporarily, would give him the space to grow and figure things out. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, the fact remained. I had sent my son away. I had made a choice that seemed impossible at the time, and the weight of that decision lingered long after he was gone. Life at home, without Ethan, was undeniably easier, but it didn't feel right. There was a silence in the house that I couldn't quite get used to. I had spent so many years trying to be a good mother to him, even when I felt like I was failing, and now that he was no longer there, I felt like I had lost a part of myself. Ethan had always been a part of the daily chaos that surrounded me, and without him, the house felt unnervingly still. Lily, of course, kept me busy, but the absence of Ethan's energy left a void that I didn't know how to fill. I would tell myself that sending him away was the right thing to do, that it was an opportunity for him to improve, for him to have a better life. Claire was great with him, and I could tell that he was starting to do better in school and making friends. He seemed happy, or at least that's what Claire would tell me. But every time we spoke on the phone or I got a picture of him, there was a part of me that couldn't ignore the nagging doubt. Was this really the right choice for him? Was I doing what was best, or was I just avoiding my own responsibilities? I felt like I was slowly losing touch with him. Our conversations, though polite, didn't feel like they used to. It wasn't the same as having him at home, where I could hear his laughter and see his silly little quirks. Now, everything was strained, distant. I missed the way he used to fight with Lily over the smallest things, or the way he would run into the kitchen with a big grin on his face, telling me about his day. I missed the noise, the chaos, the things that had once driven me crazy, but now felt like the things I longed for. Mark noticed the change in me too. While he had been relieved when Ethan left, he could see the toll it was taking on me. He tried to be supportive, but I could tell that he was also struggling with the guilt. The tension in our marriage, already there before Ethan left, had been further complicated by our decision. I started to see how much Mark had retreated into his own world, focusing on work and trying to keep things as normal as possible. In a way, we were both running away from the emotions we didn't want to face. Every time I spoke to Claire, I would ask about Ethan, but I could tell she was growing tired of the constant check-ins. She was doing her best to be there for him, and I didn't want to burden her with my doubts. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan wasn't the only one who had changed. He wasn't the only one who had lost something. I had given him away, and in doing so, I had lost a part of my identity as his mother. As much as I tried to push these feelings aside, they would creep back into my mind, especially late at night when everything was quiet. I would think about how I could have done things differently, how I could have been a better mother, how maybe if I had just stuck it out for a little longer, things would have improved. But it was too late for second guessing. Ethan was gone, and the decision had been made. I began to withdraw more into myself, focusing on Lily and trying to pretend that everything was okay. But inside, I was still wrestling with the emptiness that Ethan's absence had left behind. I tried to convince myself that this was just a phase, that the guilt would fade, but it didn't. It stayed with me, a constant reminder of the choice I had made. Mark and I had a few heart-to-hearts, but they were never enough to ease the discomfort between us. It was as though the space Ethan left behind had created a rift in our relationship as well. We had no way to bridge that gap, no way to fix the unease that lingered in our home. I would try to distract myself by keeping busy, focusing on work, or taking care of Lily, but nothing seemed to help. When I did manage to focus on something other than Ethan, there was always a voice in the back of my mind reminding me of what I had done. The loneliness in my heart seemed to grow with each passing day. I missed him more than I could put into words. Even though Ethan was no longer in my daily life, I still couldn't shake the feeling that I had let him down. There was no amount of logic or reasoning that could quiet the guilt. I tried to tell myself that I had made the right decision for his future, that this was what was best for him, but the ache of missing him never seemed to go away. I wondered if he ever thought about me the way I thought about him. Would he remember the times we shared, the moments we spent together? Or would he see me as the mother who sent him away when things got too hard? As the weeks turned into months, the guilt faded into a quiet, persistent sadness. It wasn't something I could shake off or ignore. I knew that no matter how much I tried to convince myself that I had done the right thing, I would always carry the weight of that decision with me. Ethan was no longer just my son. He had become a part of the past, a part of my heart that I couldn't quite get back. In the years that followed, I focused all my energy on raising my daughter, doing everything I could to protect her from life's hardships. However, things started to change. My son's younger sister, though still quite young, began showing signs of unruly behavior. She developed an attitude that was difficult to control, and I started to grow increasingly worried about what was happening. I had always believed I could manage any situation with her. I felt confident in my ability to guide her through any challenges. But as time passed, I began to feel as though I was losing control. The situation seemed to be spiraling, and it became even more difficult to handle knowing that my son, who had always been a source of support, wasn't there to help. The signs of her rebellion were subtle at first: a dismissive tone when speaking to me, a growing resistance to authority, and an increasing disregard for rules. I began to notice the changes in her behavior, and it unsettled me. It wasn't just typical teenage defiance. It was something deeper, something I couldn't easily explain or fix. I knew that something had shifted, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what had triggered it. At first, I tried to stay calm, thinking that it was just a phase, something that would pass as she grew older. But the more I observed, the more I realized that my daughter was pushing boundaries in ways that I hadn't seen before. It wasn't just the typical growing pains I had expected. She was becoming more distant, more difficult to communicate with, and her attitude towards me was growing colder. The hardest part was watching this unfold without my son there to help. He had always been my partner in this parenting journey, offering support and understanding when things got tough. But now, with him absent, I was left to navigate this challenging phase on my own. I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed and helpless, unsure of how to address her behavior. It was as if I was losing my grip on the situation, and I didn't know how to get back on track. I found myself questioning my approach to parenting. Had I made mistakes? Was I too lenient with her at times? Was I too strict with others? The uncertainty was weighing on me, and I started to feel like I was failing her. I couldn't help but wonder if I had missed the signs earlier, or if this was just a phase that would eventually pass. But the more I saw, the more I began to realize that I needed to step up and take control before things got worse. It was a tough realization, but I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. My daughter needed my guidance more than ever, and I had to find a way to reach her. However, the absence of my son's support made this even more difficult. I had to confront the reality that parenting, especially during these challenging times, required more than just love and patience. It required action, understanding, and a willingness to adapt to the changes happening before my eyes. As I watched my daughter continue down a path I couldn't control, I realized that this was just another chapter in our lives. It wasn't easy, but I had to accept that things wouldn't always go as planned. The next steps in my parenting journey would be harder, but I couldn't let fear and doubt stop me from trying to be the parent my daughter needed. I had to be strong for her, even if I felt lost at times. 12 years passed before Ethan reached out to me again. I had managed to bury the past deep enough that I had almost convinced myself it was a chapter I could move beyond. Life had settled, or so I thought. Mark and I had grown accustomed to the quieter, calmer home, and Lily was growing up beautifully. I thought we had managed to put the turmoil behind us. I told myself that Ethan was fine where he was, and that my decision had been for the best. After all, Claire had taken good care of him, and he had grown into a young man. But when the call came, when I saw his name flash on the screen, I knew things were about to change forever. "Mom, can we talk?" His voice came through the line, and instantly, I was taken back to when he was just a little boy, and I had sent him away, thinking that it would be the best for all of us. I swallowed hard. His voice sounded older now, no longer the child I remembered, but the man he had become. There was no bitterness, no anger in his tone, just a quiet curiosity, a question that had been brewing for years. "Why did you send me away?" he asked. The question hit me like a tidal wave, one that knocked the breath out of me. I had always known this moment would come, but I had spent years convincing myself that it wouldn't matter, that the distance would soften everything, that the years apart would somehow make the decision easier to live with. But hearing him ask that question, the one I had avoided for so long, left me stunned. I had no immediate answer. I felt like a child again, trying to justify the actions of an adult who had failed. I hesitated, not knowing where to begin. What could I say? How could I explain to him that I had sent him away because I was too tired to be the mother he needed, that I had been overwhelmed with the pressures of raising two children, that I had made the decision in a moment of weakness and fear? I could already feel the weight of the years, the silence, the years that had stretched between us, creating a chasm that felt impossible to cross. Ethan, I started, my voice faltering. "It wasn't about you. I thought it was what was best. You were struggling, and we thought a change of environment might help you." But even as the words left my mouth, I knew how hollow they sounded. They were the same excuses I had told myself back then. I had told myself that Ethan's behavior, his struggles, were something I couldn't handle, that he was better off somewhere else. But hearing him now, a grown man, asking for the truth, I couldn't escape the feeling that I had failed him in ways I couldn't undo. As we continued talking, I could hear the strain in his voice, the years of hurt, the questions that had lingered unanswered for so long. I had never realized how much my decision had shaped him, how much my absence had hurt him. He had to grow up without me, without the guidance of a mother who should have been there for him through the good and the bad. The guilt that I had buried deep within me all these years started to resurface, raw and unrelenting. I didn't want to hear it, but I had to listen. Ethan's words stung, but I needed to hear them. He wasn't angry with me. He wasn't blaming me, but his confusion was palpable. He asked about Lily, about our life now, and all I could do was try to offer vague answers. The truth was, I had no idea how to make things right. There were no words that could undo the years we lost. When he asked, "Did you ever miss me?" I couldn't help but break down. The truth was, I missed him every single day. But I had been too proud, too ashamed of my own actions to admit it, to myself or to anyone else. As the conversation continued, I realized that I couldn't keep running from the past. Ethan deserved better than that. He deserved an explanation, and he deserved the truth. I had spent so many years convincing myself that I had done the right thing, that I had made the decision that was best for him. But now, in the face of his questions, I saw it for what it was, a selfish decision. A decision made in fear and exhaustion, not in love. I had failed him, and I knew it. At the end of the conversation, I told Ethan that I was sorry. I apologized for sending him away, for not being there when he needed me the most. I knew it wasn't enough, but it was all I could offer. He didn't say much after that, but I could hear the subtle shift in his voice. He wasn't ready to forgive me, and maybe he never would be, but he wasn't pushing me away either. And for the first time in 12 years, I felt like maybe there was hope that we could rebuild our relationship. Mark could tell something had changed when I hung up the phone. I didn't need to say much. He saw the tears in my eyes. For so long, I had buried the regret, the guilt, and the fear of facing my past. But now that Ethan had returned, asking for answers, I knew I had to face it head on. And as painful as it was, I couldn't keep avoiding it. I spent the next few days thinking about everything. The years that had passed, the decisions I had made, the mother I had been, and the one I could have been. It was overwhelming, to say the least. But it was also a wake-up call. I couldn't keep living in the shadows of my past mistakes. I had to find a way to make things right, to make up for the time I had lost with my son. I didn't know how, but I knew I couldn't let him slip away again. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to try. After years of distance and silence, my son made it clear that he wasn't ready to come back into the family fold. I knew the reasons behind his decision. There were too many things left unsaid, too much hurt and disappointment built up over the years. But even though it felt like the distance between us was insurmountable, my husband and I made the decision to try again. We were both tired of seeing the divide grow. We had watched our family unravel over the years, and neither of us was willing to accept that this was how things would end. We both knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. It would take time, effort, and patience to rebuild the trust and the bond that had once been so strong between us. But we were determined to make it work, not just for us, but for our children, for our family. I had spent too many nights alone, reflecting on the mistakes I had made and the moments I had let slip by. I had always been so focused on my daughter's behavior, on trying to manage everything that seemed to be falling apart, that I lost sight of the bigger picture. My son had been pushed to the side, not out of malice, but because I had been too absorbed in other things. He had been right to feel neglected. I had failed him when he needed me the most, and now all I wanted was to make things right. Despite the effort we were willing to put in, I understood that there was no guarantee things would improve. My son had valid reasons for keeping his distance, reasons I couldn't easily brush away. I knew I couldn't expect him to just forget the past and step back into the family without addressing the pain that had been caused. I couldn't expect him to simply forgive and forget, not when there were years of regret and missed moments. But that didn't mean I was going to give up. I wasn't going to let the fear of failure stop me from trying to mend the broken pieces. I believed that at the very least we owed it to ourselves to try again. There were no promises, no guarantees, but if there was a chance to restore what we once had, we had to take it. I discussed it with my husband, and we both agreed that we needed to show our son that we were willing to make the changes necessary. We couldn't undo the past, but we could prove that we were ready to be better parents. We could prove that we wanted him back in our lives, not just as a son, but as a person who deserved to be heard, valued, and loved. We knew the journey would be long. We knew there would be setbacks, and perhaps even more moments of rejection. But we had to make that choice, for our family, for the love we had, and for the hope that, one day, things could be different. I spent days reflecting on how I could approach my son and what I would say to him when the time came. I wanted to show him that I was different, that I had changed, that I had learned from my mistakes. I wanted to tell him that I understood why he felt the way he did, and that I was truly sorry for the times I had failed him. As time passed, I realized that I couldn't force him to come back. I couldn't control how he felt or how quickly he would be willing to trust us again. But I could control how I acted, how I approached the situation, and how I tried to make things right. My husband and I agreed that the next steps would be slow, deliberate, and compassionate. We didn't want to rush anything, not anymore. This time, it would be different. We would prove to our son and to ourselves that family could endure, even through the toughest times. It wouldn't be easy, but it was a chance worth taking. Despite everything that had happened, I still believed in the power of love, of change, and of redemption. And I wasn't going to give up on my son or on our family, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. After numerous conversations and arguments, I came to the painful realization that all my efforts had been in vain. My son didn't want to return, and I couldn't force him. The years that had passed were filled with mistakes in how I raised him. And now, I had to face the consequences of my actions. He had built a life for himself, one that didn't include us, and I knew deep down that he had no desire to reconnect. The feelings of guilt and regret overwhelmed me, and I found myself wondering if there was anything I could do to fix the situation, or if the damage was already irreversible. Looking back, I saw the many ways I had failed him. I hadn't been there when he needed me most, and my focus had shifted to other problems, neglecting the one person who had always been there, my son. I made excuses, told myself I was doing my best, but the truth was, I wasn't. I had taken him for granted, assumed that the bond between us would be unbreakable, and now I was facing the consequences of that negligence. I couldn't deny it. I had missed the signs. I had failed to see how my son was struggling, how his needs were being ignored. His absence from the family wasn't just a result of his own decisions. It was a reflection of how I had failed to nurture and protect our relationship. And no matter how hard I tried to reach out, it seemed like every attempt was met with rejection. He had moved on, built a life without us, and I couldn't bring myself to blame him. He had every right to feel the way he did, to want to distance himself from a family that had let him down so many times. The regret was all-consuming. I kept thinking back to moments when I could have done more, when I could have been more present, more attentive, more involved. But those moments had passed, and now the reality of our fractured relationship set in. I couldn't undo the past, and no amount of apology or effort could turn back time. My son had made his choice, and I had to respect that. Even if it tore me apart inside, I understood, too late, that parenting wasn't just about providing for your children physically, but emotionally and mentally as well. I had thought that as long as we were stable, as long as he had everything he needed, that would be enough. But it wasn't. The emotional bond, the trust, the sense of security, these were the things I had failed to nurture. And now, I was paying the price for that oversight. There were moments when I wanted to give up, when the weight of the guilt felt unbearable. But deep down, I knew that I couldn't stop trying. I couldn't erase the mistakes of the past, but I could learn from them. I could try to be a better person, a better parent, moving forward. The road to reconciliation, if it ever came, would be long and difficult, but I had to keep going, for my own sake, and perhaps one day, for my son's. In the end, this story is about a mother's failure in raising her child, the neglect that led to estrangement, and the heavy consequences that come when parents fail to face the truth. I didn't protect my son the way I should have, and now, all I can do is live with regret. It wasn't easy to accept, but I had to.